Hey everybody, Coach Jonathan here, and welcome to a sneak peek of a new podcast from us here at TrainerRoad. It's called the Successful Athletes Podcast, and it's where we interview individuals who have done something extraordinary on the bike. Whether that's winning a race, whether that's getting a PR, or something interesting or noteworthy in any way that they have done on the bike, we'll interview those athletes, we'll dissect their preparation and their execution so that hopefully we can learn something from these performances that will make us faster cyclists and multi-sport athletes. Now, this will be an entirely different podcast from the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast. But right now, like I said, you're going to get a sneak peek at the first episode with Keegan Swenson. And in the coming couple weeks here, you're going to get more episodes coming out when the podcast is actually released. So stay tuned to trainerroad.com/forum for more news from that. And I hope you enjoy this episode with the current Everesting World Record holder, Keegan Swenson. Welcome to a new podcast by TrainerRoad, the Successful Athletes Podcast, where we dig into the performances of athletes who've done something that's noteworthy, respectable, or just plain awesome in one way or another. And for this first episode, we have Stans Pivots and Monster Hydro's Keegan Swenson. What's up, Keegan?
How's it going?
We are going to talk about your, latest achievement that you just did, and it was an Everesting attempt, correct?
It was.
Can you dig into it a little bit? What was your time and everything else?
Yeah, so the official time from Hell's 500 was 7 hours and 40 minutes, I think 5 seconds.
That's really fast.
Yeah.
And what is Everesting, to give people some context?
Yeah, so Everesting is, I guess, riding your bike one continuous time for 29,029 feet or more if you want. This one turned out to be 29,600, I think, was my final number.
There are other rules too, right? Like you have to repeat a climb to do it.
Yeah, so you have to repeat a climb to do it. You can't have big descents on the way back down, so you can't have any momentum to get free climb, free elevation, for example. Mm-hmm. So your segment can be as long or as short as you want. So. Got
it. So it has to be you can't have a loop. It has to be a turnaround, basically, at the base of it is the intent.
Yeah.
To make you climb and earn every single foot of it. So
yeah. In a perfect world, you'd have a wall ride or something at the bottom to whale on, but that's not
no
how
X
it
Games.
goes. Yeah.
So you got the world record, right?
I did.
And what in the world made you want to do this?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. The last couple months, I've been just pondering something to do. I was like, man, it's been a while since I've done something big and kind of gnarly and hard. And without racing going on, I really have been chomping at the bit to do something to really push myself. And you had talked a bit about Everesting before, and that's kind of where I got the idea. I was like, I wonder if I could get the Everesting fastest time, that would be pretty cool, and I knew the time was somewhere around, I think it was just under 9 hours, right? 8:59.
Yep.
So my original plan was to go most of the way up Pine Canyon and do 12 reps, I think was the initial plan. And then Phil Gaiman went and ripped the record to pieces by doing sub 8. And I was like, well, back to the drawing board. We're going to have to scrap everything I just planned and try again to go faster, because that plan was maybe going to be 8.5 at the best.
Yeah.
So I talked to you, and you helped me come up with the fastest possible segment on the road I wanted to do it on. I wasn't going to do it anywhere else. Pine Canyon is gnarly. It's steep. It's my home turf. So that's where I wanted to do it. So.
Yeah. Let's talk about the route and the selection and everything else. Pine Canyon, also some people call it Empire Pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's been used in the Tour of Utah before?
Yeah, almost every year.
Yeah. And it's a climb basically from Midway, Utah, up and over to a very high pass over, and then you drop back down to Park City, Utah.
You can either go to Park City or you can go left and climb for another 15-ish minutes and then go down Big Cottonwood Canyon to Salt Lake.
Yeah. So it's basically the top of the Wasatch Mountains, more or less, is where you're climbing up to the top of that. What made you, we talked about the fact that it's your home turf, and we also talked about how you had to change it to make it even more concentrated to find more climbing. But can you kind of outline, to give people an idea of how you did it so that maybe they can do it, what made you pick that climb in particular? Because there are plenty of other climbs you could have selected in Utah. And then also, what made you pick that section of that climb, if you can work toward that direction?
So this climb, I think the biggest thing for me is that it's steep, right? You get good bang for your buck. And then the segment I chose, it's the most consistent grade the entire time. there's not very many. There's only like 2 flat spots, and then there's only one pitch where it was 22.5 or 23%, which is steep, but it was short.
Yeah, plenty steep.
So then the other thing is it's a fast descent to get down. So I was turning around at the first switchback, which meant that I didn't have a lot of speed to even enter that switchback. So I really only had to brake once on the entire descent and then brake again at the bottom to turn around, which was ideal. I think I like averaged like 48 or 49 miles an hour on the descent every lap, which is really fast. And,
very fast.
It adds up. If you're doing 30 laps, you're going to need to have all the time you can on the descent. So
that's one thing that is important to keep in mind is the fact that if you have turns and things you have to brake for in the descent, multiply that all the times you have to descend, and you start to lose some time. And then also the fatigue that comes with going through a long Everesting attempt, because I still think that it ended up being about 102 miles of 105 total. Yeah. So that's a long time. It's a long distance to be on the bike for anybody, right? So it kind of makes sense in this case, if you're thinking about doing it, to find a route with the least amount of turns and the least amount of points where you have to brake. Because at the very least, it just makes a long thing unnecessarily longer if you do have the option to pick something else.
And like, even if you're not going for the fastest time, you still don't want to be out there for as minimal time as possible, right? Like there's a big difference between 17 hours and 20 hours. And if you can get that for free by just picking a different route, then that's pretty cool.
Right. Exactly. So when you can you give people kind of an idea? You said that it's more or less consistent all the way up. It does. When you said flat spots, do you mean they're actually flat, or did the grade just calm down a little bit?
They seem flat.
Yeah.
So at the bottom, I think it's maybe 7% where the gate is. Let me also go back here for a sec. The other reason I chose this climb is because it's still gated to cars. I think it actually opened today, which is 3 days later. So it's safer, less stressful without traffic. And I mean, who doesn't like to ride on a road without cars? So I was like, I'm doing this now. This is the road. So anyway, I started at the gate, and maybe there it was, I want to say 6 or 7%. It's pretty mellow. And then it maybe kicks up to 9 or 10. There's maybe one pitch at 15, and then it probably flattens back out to like 6 or 7. Mm-hmm. And then there's another pitch of probably 10 to 12, and then it flattens back out again to back 6 or 7. And then there's a steady, probably 3-minute drag of solid 10, 12%. And then it kicks up to that 23% switchback.
Sheesh. And that's where you turned around.
And that's where I turned around every time. And like even the flat spots, I still was able to stay in the small ring. I never put it up into the big ring, except for the last lap when I was going all out.
Got it.
So yeah, it was still flat. It's still pretty steep.
Yeah. About how long how long was the lap in terms of distance? And then how much did you climb each time?
So it was 1.8 miles each way. So it was about 3.6 or so round trip. I can't remember the exact distance. And then the climb itself was anywhere between 13 and 14 minutes. I think my fastest was like 12:38. Mm-hmm. And that was the last lap. And my slowest was maybe like 14 and 20 seconds, I think. So it was about that. And then the descent, my quickest time down was 2:10.
Jeez.
I think the slowest was like 2.5.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference right there. Just a quick descent time.
Exactly. And like the thing is, it's a fun descent too. Like I had a good time pretty much every lap going down. So that's the other thing is you want to find a descent that you enjoy. Like there's enough turns that you don't have to hit the brakes, but you can still, you're kind of flowing and like having a good time, because if you're going to do it that many times, you might as well kind of enjoy it.
That kind of leads us into pacing. Was that time frame of 12 to 14 minutes of work offset by roughly 2 to 3 minutes of rest? Was that enough? Did you like reach the bottom and feel rested every time? And then from there we can get into the pacing.
I think so. I mean, obviously like more rest would have been good, but then you're wasting time going downhill. So it's not good. So I think for this effort, it was about right. I felt pretty fresh every time I turned around. It was funny. Like as the day went on, like first I'd turn around and my heart rate would stay at 140, 130 for a while. And then it would, by the top, it was kind of back up in the tempo zone. And then like by the end of the day, I was turning around immediately at 150. and then my heart rate would hit like mid 170s at the top. So it wasn't enough rest like
Yeah,
at the end, but
crept up over the
definitely
course
added
of the
up.
day.
It
What's a
did,
max?
yeah.
What's a max heart rate for you, just for a point of reference for people?
Like full gas, like maybe hit 190.
And is
I
that
think.
at elevation or sea level?
I don't think it matters much, to be honest. I haven't seen much higher than 190 anywhere.
Got it.
So
And this, it's also worth mentioning. We didn't mention this about the climb. It is at elevation, right? So what's the elevation of the climb?
So the
At
starting
base, or-
climb, I think was like, I think it was like 5,900 at the base, and the top was right around 69 or 7.
Got
Like
it.
the average elevation was about 6,000 feet that I spent, at least according to Strava or something.
So how'd you build out a pacing plan, and how did that work toward the route, or did that change your route selection at all? Like, for example, did you know that you could maintain a certain amount of power, so you looked for a climb that fit that, or once you found the climb, you just knew that you had to pace in a certain way?
I mean, honestly, I don't think it mattered too much because you're going to be spending the same amount of time doing that work, no matter how long or short the segment is. So whether it's a 20-minute climb or a 5-minute climb, you're going to be doing that same amount of work climbing. It's just going to be broken up more. I don't think I really would have wanted a longer segment because then that gives more time for your heart rate to ramp up. Maybe in a perfect world, 10 minutes would have been ideal, but that's when my heart rate really started to like hit high, was right around the 10, 12-minute mark. So yeah, I'm not sure it matters too much. So like, I just knew how long I had to do it. And that's was like, and then for pacing, I kind of went back to white rim, and I was like, well, the goal there was to do 280 watts for 5.5 hours. And I really only did it for about 4 hours until I blew up out there in the desert. So I was like, I should be able to do that same power here with support and proper hydration. And I talked to my coach about it, and he's like, that's like, you should be able to do that. Like, it's going to be hard. Like, it's actually tempo. Like, that is zone 3. But if you do 270 to 280 every lap up, then that should be sustainable. So
Yeah.
that was the goal.
And with the descending in there as well, looking at the actual like time that you spent there just for the Everesting portion of it, like separating out, because you kept climbing after you got it just to be sure, right?
I did, yeah. I was going to do 29 full laps just to be safe, even though I knew it was 28 and a half was
Right.
the actual, yeah.
So you had a normalized of 265 and then an average of 237. So even with the descending, that's impressive. That, and I guess it's short descent for the amount of time that you had climbing, but. So yeah, that's pretty high. What's your FTP, and then what's your weight?
FTP up at altitudes probably I'd say around 370 right now, if I had to guess, give or take. And I think I weigh about 141 pounds.
Okay, so that's a high watt kg. That's very high. So I mean, obviously, if you're setting the world record Everesting time, that's probably the case. But just the same, on the pacing side of things, what made you think that you could ride at around 280 watts? Was it you mentioned the precedent of setting the FKT or the fastest known time on white rim, but was that basically like you just knew that you could sustain that from training? How did you arrive at the power?
That's, yeah, I mean, kind of from training. Like when I do my long, like 4 or 5 hour, like hard endurance or low tempo days, whatever you want to call it. That's kind of about what I can do. Like I can go and ride 270 to 280 watts pretty much as long as I want. Like obviously it gets hard. So I was like, well, if I can do it for 4 or 5 hours, in theory, I should be able to do it for 7 or 8. I mean, I've never done it, but like it's logical. The physiology says I can. So
Yeah.
I figured I'd try.
Yeah, that's funny how that works, right? Because is the intensity factor, the percentage of your threshold that you're riding at, as that drops, you can extend that out for a lot longer. As it increases, like you can only hold it for a short period of time, right? But then as it drops down, and especially when you're talking about somewhere around, like when you're talking about riding at 0.7, 0.6 really to 0.7 IF, you can do that for a really long time.
As long as you're fit.
Yeah, as long as you're fit. So with the pacing plan, when you were building that whole thing out, were there any concerns? Because you mentioned that you blew up at white rim. So were you concerned that the power was too high, or what learnings did you take from your FKT attempt at white rim into this?
Yeah, for the white rim attempt, honestly, I felt the legs felt really good there. And I think what happened is it was just nutrition and hydration. I didn't plan that out there. It's White Rim is self-supported, so you have to carry everything with you. So it's kind of a balance of like, well, I think I maybe need this much water for 5.5 hours, and you kind of gamble on the lighter side because you don't want to carry gallons of water with you. I also, like at White Rim, I should have ran water and drink mix. I only had drink mix. I figured it's a low enough intensity that my stomach would be okay with drink mix, but turns out it wasn't. So my stomach locked up. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. So I basically ran 2 hours with one gel at the end. I think that's what blew me to pieces there. So I was like, I felt fine until then. So I think with proper fueling, I was like, I should be no problem to be able to do that effort for longer.
Got it. What about the training side of things? Did you train specifically for this? Right now, for those that are listening to this in the future, right now we're in the midst of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown restrictions, and as a result, racing isn't happening. So did you train specifically for this since you didn't have any events on the calendar, or was this just continuing your training as normal?
No, I mean, it was kind of funny. It was like very spur of the moment. I had been like pondering this Everest thing for a while, and for as far as training goes, we've just been training as if we're going to be racing in August or whatever my coach kind of has in the plan. So right now we've just been doing big volume. Like the last 3 weeks have been probably like 25-hour weeks, like with a couple like 1200 TSS. So they've been pretty stirty weeks.
How big is that relative?
Tempo.
Sorry, but how big is that relative to what you would normally carry?
It's, I think, average throughout the entire year, I average about 20 hours a week. So it really isn't, it was a little bigger than normal. It's just like base season. It's like back in January, right? So it's not huge, but not that big, relatively speaking. So kind of just been doing that. And I've done some tempo, lots of like over geared work, like strength endurance. But I hadn't done anything. I hadn't done any LT, like basically nothing more than 320 watts for a while, aside from some sprints.
So when you say tempo and stuff, you're talking like, that's really getting into like that sweet spot range too, I assume. Like you probably have still tipped into there, I assume, at some point.
Yeah, I mean, you float into that sweet spot, especially with your heart rate, right? When you're doing hours of tempo, eventually like you're going to float up. And sometimes on those hard endurance rides, I'm like, well, I'm going to roll some low threshold sweet spot here to go for a segment or like whatever. So I spend a fair bit of time in that tempo sweet spot zone.
Yeah, cool. So you didn't change your training at all for this. You just took the fitness you had and went with it.
Exactly. And it's honestly, it's as far as like CTL goes, it's about as high as it's ever been, or dang near, like it's pretty close. So I was like, well, I'm about as fit as I've been. I feel really good training. This past week was planned to be a rest week. So basically after that 3-week block, I took, we had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 days easy. I just did like some recovery rides and like 1 2-hour endurance day. And then send in Everest on Friday. I figured it was like, I wanted to do it on a Friday rather than Saturday because I figured the road would be less busy with hikers and whatnot. And also the weather looked better on Friday. The high was only 66 instead of like 72. So
yeah, heat plays a difference for sure. Because that climb's exposed too, right? So the heat didn't matter.
It's south facing, and there's normally like a little bit of a tailwind, so you get really hot. Even 60 degrees feels like 80 on that climb.
Yeah. So on the training front, and we'll get into what you learned actually when you executed here, and like the things that you would advise others on doing, or what you learned about your execution. But having done it now, do you think that you're just continuing with the training that you had was a good approach? Or if you were really going for this, would you change the way that you trained at all?
I think my training was pretty good for it. I mean, if I was going to specifically train for this, maybe I would have done a couple 6-hour rides. Like it's been a while since I've done a 6-hour day. I did quite a few 5-hour rides, but maybe we'll throw in some 6-hour days. Maybe would have done a little longer tempo efforts. But honestly, not really. I don't like, my threshold was high enough now, and like my fitness was there, and I don't think you need much more than that. Like you just need a high threshold and you need good fitness. You don't need any VO2. You don't need really any LT work.
Yeah.
You just need to be able to sustain that like steady tempo sweet spot for a very long time.
Yeah. For however long the segment is that you're repeating, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So on the equipment side of things, What gearing did you pick for this one? That's a super steep climb, but
It
granted, since
is.
your power to weight ratio is so high, we'd have to normalize it here a little bit. But what gearing did you pick?
So normally the gearing I have on my bike is a 5236 up front, and then I run an 1132 in the back. I like to have I live in Utah, so there's a lot of climbs, and I normally like to have a relatively small gearing just because I don't like to be grinding up all the climbs. And then I had the 52 up front because for group rides this winter in Tucson, I was like, well, I need to have that 52 so I don't get dropped and I can win the sprints and, try and actually be competitive and that stuff.
Yeah.
That's normally what I use. But then this week for the Everest, I stole my girlfriend Sophia's compact rings off one of her bikes. So I borrowed her 3450.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then you run a Shimano drivetrain, so you can just swap the rings over. You don't have to worry about BCD or anything like that. That's easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I ran Dura-Ace, so I was able to her Ultegra rings slapped right on there, and we were good to go. And I did do a test run with my Everest, out my longer segment originally with the 5236, and it was close, but in order to hold on to 80 and 90 RPM up the steeper grades, I had to do 300 watts, and I wanted to keep it between 270 and 280. So I was like, okay, we'll just drop into a 34, should do it.
Yeah.
So the only place I had to drop below 70 RPM was that 122% grade. And I just stood up and just did 320 watts for the 40 seconds or whatever it was. It was, in the end, I think it was actually good because it forced me to go hard for just a second. And then I turned around immediately and got rest. So I think it was okay.
What power meter were you running for context for folks too?
So I had a 4i power meter, just a left only, and then a Wahoo Element Bolt for the head unit.
Did you do anything to your bike in particular to make it extra light? That's a huge topic for Everesting, and granted, and for good reason, right? Because you're spending a lot of time climbing. But did you do anything in that regard?
So I normally run the Stans Avion wheels. So I borrowed Sophia's the Grail CB7s, which I think they're 250 grams lighter. So I used those, and then I ran just a teeny bit of race sealant, just little bit, just enough to seal the tires. And then I also took off one of my bottle cages, took off my saddlebag, took off my blinky because it's a closed road. Don't need a blinky on a closed road.
Yeah.
I just took off all non-essential parts. Honestly, in hindsight, I almost get taken off the big ring, but.
Right. Yeah.
Silly.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Did you on the apparel side, what you were actually wearing? What helmet did you use? Because you're a cask athlete, so you can probably switch between an aero or a climbing helmet.
Yeah. So I've got the Utopia and the Protone, and I chose the Protone just because it's a bit lighter, a little more well vented, and I was like, I'm only going to average about 8 miles an hour on the climb, and then the descent, it's so steep that you're just ripping anyway, so I wasn't really too concerned about aero gains. So I went for the lighter helmet with more ventilation.
Yeah, I mean, if you're tipping over probably the 13 mile an hour mark, at that point you'd probably want to consider, right? But
yeah, I'd say even over 10, I might have considered the aero helmet.
Yeah,
but it also depends on the heat too. If you're going to be happier or more comfortable with the non-aero helmet, then you should wear that.
Yeah, I can't help but think that you'd have to be really, really extremely fit or have a very unique climb to be able to climb, around 13 miles an hour for an Everest, right? And
my average speed was 13 and a half with that 50 mile an hour downhill. So it's still barely even touching aero gains.
Yeah.
With the descent, and the descent was so fast, I'm braking and whatnot anyway. So
yes, if you're ever applying brakes, then at that point, your aero gains don't matter. Yeah.
I was super tucking, but that's mainly to get a change of position because it's a lot of work to bend really low. So I found it was less effort to sit on the top tube and just crouch. So that's the main reason I was doing it.
Yeah.
And it's fast.
On logistics, how did you? So you mentioned you had one bottle cage, and then did you have people supporting you? Where were they positioned on the climb? And then how did you work on carrying things on you?
Yeah, so I put a fair bit of thought into because I was I really don't want to carry anything. All I carried was my Stance Dart and one small CO2 in case I flatted somewhere. So otherwise I was just grabbing stuff. So we set the feed zone up at the bottom. Both my parents were there, plus some other friends came and went throughout the day. we had a table and easy up, all that stuff, bunch of extra water. And then for the bottles, I think I made like 20 bottles in total, but I only filled them like this much, basically just like a few big swigs. So I would take the bottle, take a swig, put it in my cage, and then do another swig at the top, and then chuck it at the bottom, get a new one. And then how we had it set up is the feed zone was far enough up from the gate at the bottom that as I was coming down, I would just like shout over and say, hey, I want a goo this lap, or Fig Newtons, or I want chews. And then, or I'd want water, or I want Monster Hydro, or I want my mix this lap. So I would like just tell them kind of what I want preemptively. Or sometimes if I thought about it in the climb, I'd text my mom and say like, hey, can you please make me more of this or whatever.
You were texting mid Everest.
Yeah.
That's funny.
I figured it was easier than shouting sometimes. So,
right.
Like, hey, can I get some more goo mix this lap? Or can I have Monster Hydro next one? So it's easy to send a few, short little texts.
A quick aside to this is, and actually an important detail that we left out is, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was texting him and he was texting me throughout this, but your housemate, Ryan Standish, and good friend, he was also Everesting at the same time. Mm-hmm. And kind of your motivation as well as his, and in a lot of ways, and his absolutely, was to raise money for Bike MS, which can you explain some context for that so then people can understand?
Yeah, so kind of how I roped Ryan into this. It was kind of like my scheme to do this whole thing. And my main, like originally I was like, oh, I just want to do this to see if I can do it. Like, this just sounds like an awesome challenge. And then I was like, man, it'd be really cool to like get some money together and donate to an awesome charity. Like, I think this is a good opportunity, like to spread the word. And like, I couldn't think of anything on top of my head that like I deeply like cared about as far as that goes. But I knew that Ryan has done this like Bike MS fundraiser the past couple of years. And I was like, oh, if I can't think of something myself, I really want, like, if I can help Ryan make this like even bigger than it ever has been, then that'd be really cool. Mm-hmm. So I called Ryan up Monday, like midway through my recovery ride. I had this idea pop in my head and I was like, hey, will you Everest with me if we can raise $1,000 by Friday for Bike MS? His goal was 3,000 at the time. Mm-hmm. And he's like, absolutely, I'll do it. And I was like, all right, got it. So we did that. We raised $1,000 within like a matter of hours. It turns out people want to see Ryan climb.
Yeah, he's not built like you. He's probably like 160, 170 pounds, somewhere around there.
Yeah. Yeah, we raised all that money quick. And then after that, we're like, well, now we got to keep this going, do something cool. So Ryan said he'll climb an extra foot for every $1 over 1,000 that we raise. So he ended up climbing like 32,000 feet, almost did Mariana's Trench.
Yeah.
So after he Everested, still pretty fast. I mean, I think he Everested like 10.5 hours.
Yeah.
With some stops. Like, he wasn't like going, and he was doing a longer segment with more switchbacks and more climbing. So he did like 20 laps, I think was his segment.
And texting.
And texting.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
All that.
Yeah. He's so that was awesome of him to do that. His father actually was diagnosed with MS a number of years ago, and it's definitely like affected Ryan. And I think it was a really cool thing to see him do, because his event, usually the fundraiser that he has going on for everything else, it was canceled this year. So good on you and Ryan for doing that.
Yeah, it was cool.
If you do want to donate also to Ryan's fundraiser, to his fundraising efforts for Bike MS, you totally should. And you can just find him on Instagram. Go to Ryan Standwich, and you can find him there and continue to donate. I know Jeff Kabush donated $100 like at the last minute, and he had to climb 100 extra feet.
Yeah, so Ryan came down. He thought he was about done, and I was like, "Hey, Kabush just donated an extra $100, so you better get up there and do another lap." And the link is also in my Instagram bio.
Cool, awesome,
and it's in like on some of the like cycling news, Vela news. I put the hyperlink into. So,
how can they find you on Instagram?
Kegels99.
Cool. So getting back to it a little bit on the aid station locations. So you had them at the bottom. You told them what you needed as you passed them, and then turned around, and then just a little bit later you'd pass them climbing up. You took a swig of your bottle, put it back in. It was only a partially filled bottle. Took a swig at the top. How much water did you take in, or how much liquid did you take in during that whole time? And what did you drink?
So I was aiming for about a bottle an hour total. Maybe like I might not have hit that. Maybe I went a little over some hours. So I'd say probably 70% of what I drank was drink mix, just like a lighter ratio of the goo Roctane mix.
Uh-huh.
And then the rest was water or Monster Hydro.
Got
And I
it.
had maybe 3 like full bottles of Monster Hydro in total, maybe a little less.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
Which that's going to bring on caffeine and then sugar as well. It's kind of
Yeah,
like
so
it's kind of like a sports drink with caffeine, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
there's about 188 milligrams per bottle, so it's quite a bit. It's a good way to get in, like just to keep your caffeine topped off, and as well as hit a little extra sugar on top of the drink mix. So
Yeah. Yeah. What did you eat when you were on the bike,
yeah,
and how did you work that out?
so I kind of talked to my nutritionist the day before. I was like, "Hey, I'm doing this dumb thing tomorrow.
Day before.
How can I get? What's the best way to get 90 grams of carbs an hour?" Because I figured that was a pretty good number. I normally train with maybe a little less, like 70, but I figured I could handle a little more for this big thing. So he suggested using like a mix of goo gels, goo chews, and real food. So I started off with more real food, and then slowly transitioned to more and more goos. But I still was trying to alternate just to keep my stomach, like keep it interesting, and just keep the stomach happy. Because I think if you do, one thing I learned from White Rim is if you just solely go off of goos and chews, then your stomach, there's just a lot of like the same thing. I think just a lot of sugar. So you want to give it some slower stuff to process. So I had some fig Newtons, I had some donuts, I had some pancakes. I made some like white bread, peanut butter and jellies, really light on the peanut butter, mainly just for flavor. And that all tasted good. And I had options for everything. I had every flavor of goo I had in the house. And I had multiple flavors of chews. And you just want to have options. You never really know what you're going to feel like. Like there's one lap where I was like, I don't feel like eating that. But I was like, oh, Hoppy Trails, like deer goo, I'll eat that right now. So like you just want to have like different flavors and different things to keep you motivated.
When it got down to executing and actually making it happen, did you pick a time of day in particular for this? We're obviously right now, for the Northern Hemisphere at least, it's longer days are going on right now. But how did you pick the time of day? Was that an important detail, or you just went when you went?
So I looked at the weather and I was trying to find a time where it was warm enough that I didn't need leg warmers, and then I wouldn't need all that winter gear. Because it's still cold in the mornings here, so. I figured about 8 a.m. was going to be a nice time. It was going to be about 48 or so. So I think I ended up riding at like 8:15. So I was being a little slow, but and it was perfect. It was nice. I mean, didn't really get cold, and the hottest it got all day was maybe 70 degrees.
Cool. So perfect
in the sun. So
yeah. What was your pre-race breakfast, and how did you time that? Pre-ride, so normally, I should say.
Yeah,
not race.
I kind of went off. Yeah, normally for pre-race, I normally do like 2.5 to 3 hours. But for this event, since I was starting a little slower and it's so long, I was like, I should be able to handle like 1.5 to 2 hours before. Plus, I get a little extra sleep that way. So I went for just 2 massive pancakes with peanut butter. Oh, I put chocolate chips in them too because I was like extra KJs. Toss them in there. So chocolate chip pancakes with peanut butter, banana, some Greek yogurt, and coffee, and that was the pre-breakfast.
Cool.
And a lot of hydration too with breakfast.
Looking at your ride right now, like I said earlier, 265 normalized, 237 average, and just for the Everesting portion, it was 740, 740.05, and you ended up actually going through that. You did burn, looking at here on TrainerRoad, 6,538 kilojoules, or 6,500 kilojoules, I should say, throughout that process. That's a ton.
That's a lot.
That's a ton to take in. Did you find that you had to adjust either your pacing or nutrition plan or anything else coming in? What did you realize while you were executing that you had to ad lib and change on the fly?
Actually, as far as pacing goes, I think it was pretty good. I did, like with a few laps to go, I was like, I think I can go a little harder. Like, so I just emptied the tank. And like in hindsight, I'm like, I wonder if I could have tacked on 5 watts every lap to go a little bit faster and spread that out. But maybe it wouldn't have mattered because I made up a minute the last 2 laps going faster. So like maybe that would have been the same anyway, but it would have been more of a gamble because maybe I couldn't have done that, and maybe it was better doing what I did. So hard to say there on pacing, but I think I nailed it as far as pacing goes. That's pretty close.
How hard was it to pick it up at the end? Like, you're kind of like in the steady rhythm for so long.
Yeah.
Was that like a psychological barrier to break through? Or you mentioned that you kind of felt like you could do it, so you went for it. But was that difficult at all just to change pace suddenly after doing it for so long?
Honestly, it felt kind of good because I've been doing the same thing for so long. And the last few laps, I was like, man, I'm not hurting enough. I can make myself hurt more. Like, we need to go harder. Like,
You're weird.
Get on the gas. Like, I was like, I've been doing this for almost 8 hours, and like, it hurts, but I think I can dig a little deeper. And if I'm going to do this, I might as well get as much out of it as possible and try to make my time as fast as possible. So I figured I'd drop the clutch and give her. So I just rolled up the threshold, and I held threshold like halfway up the climb, and then I blow up and limp at the top at like 270. And then I did it again the second to last lap, and that was it. Yeah. So I think pacing was pretty close. And then with nutrition, I did decide that I kind of wanted a little more drink mix than I anticipated. So I ended up like texting my mom and asking if she could mix up some more drink mix out some of the water I had made. Other than that, I think everything went pretty well. Like, there's not much else I'd change, to be honest.
Yeah, smooth
as far
day.
as like all that goes. Yeah.
What would you? So now that you've done it, first of all, how hard is Everesting compared to the other things that you've done? Because you're current national champion in XCO in the United States, pro national champion. Like you mentioned, the White Rim FKT record. You've won plenty of epic rides races. Where does it rank in terms of hardness? I'm sure it's also just very different, but
I think in total, it's the hardest thing I've ever done on a bike. Like, if you're combining the mental and physical side of it, it was just like the first few laps, like I was like, wow, like I still have 27 laps to go. Like, what am I doing? Like, my dad was riding next to me on my e-bike, and I was like, this is so dumb. Why am I doing this? And then like you just get into the rhythm, and yeah, I think mentally it was kind of difficult at the end. Like, when you realize you have like, I was 6 hours in, and that's when it started to hurt and everything started to load up. Your heart rate's creeping up the threshold, even though you're only riding 270 watts, whatever I was doing. And then like, I was like, man, I still have an hour and a half left. This is like an hour and a half isn't very much. But at the same time, I was like, that's an XCO race I have left. Like, that's a lot, you know? Yeah. So I'd say that was, yeah, it was definitely, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I think like White Rim, I suffered more because I was dehydrated, and I also had to get off my bike and walk up Schaefer Climb for a bit. But this suffering was so long and drawn out, like that, like mentally too, I was like, I'm doing like 29 of this, and this is just a lot to wrap my head around. And I think one thing that really helped me was I didn't really ever look at the total time on my Wahoo. I just had a lap screen, and I just would lap it every time and just ticking off laps. Like, all right, here we go. I knew my time. I did get to this side. I did get to halfway up the climb in like 8 minutes, and I was here at 10. And I was just focusing on the little things, like lap by lap, piece by piece.
Yeah. Instead of thinking of the 28 and a half laps or 29 laps you had to do, just think of the smaller segments.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I get through. Like, my coach has me do 10 by 10s, like 10-minute intervals, and I break it up like, all right, well, once I do two, I've only got 9 left, and I just like break it down and play mind games. So I figured I'd do the same thing, but for 8 hours, and it worked. You know?
Yeah. So, we're smart creatures, but at the same time, it's easy to make to work the system a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having Everested, what advice did you give to other people that want to do it? Like, what did you learn from this process on execution that you feel like you would want to pass to somebody else that wants to do it, that's listening to this?
I think the biggest thing is find a climb that you enjoy, and find a climb that suits your ability level. You know, like, just because I picked a climb that's 11% average doesn't mean you should, and doesn't mean you have to. Like, if you need a climb that's 6%, 7%, like whatever, just pick it and do it. And if you want a climb that has switchbacks, like, and you want to do it, that's fine. Like, just because you're going to be a little slower downhill, if you're going to enjoy doing that climb more, like, just think you're going to be doing this a lot, and you're going to be spending a lot of time out here. So that's big. If you have to ride a mountain bike on the road to get the right gearing, like, do it. Like, doesn't matter what you do. Like, as long as you're doing it and you're going to have like a good cadence, and you're going to like enjoy yourself, maybe you need more upright position. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing, is like, pick a segment somewhere that you actually love. Like I'll be able to go ride Pine Canyon, do intervals on it next week. I'm still going to love it. Like it doesn't matter. So I think that's the key.
Cool. Anything else that you'd want to say to somebody that wants to do it? Whether it's in terms of execution, pacing, equipment, anything like that? Nutrition?
Make sure you find a good support crew, like whether it's your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, just some buddies. Like you have to have people to help you because it'd be a lot to take on your own. Like even with both my parents there and some friends helping, it was still a lot of work for them. And like I'm grateful for that support. And I think like you need to have people to help you do it, and also to have people along to help to do some laps with you. Like I had like Brandon Peterson, one of the Bear Development kids, did 7 laps with me. My buddies Chris did, I think he did 5 with me. And there were some other random people that just do 1 and then they'd take off and continue with their ride. So I think like having people to say like, yeah, you got this, like just keep going, like that was pretty big. So if you can have a buddy jump in for a lap or 2, it's always nice to have that company.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you'd like to add, Keegan?
I don't think so. I'm glad it's over.
I bet. It's amazing looking at this and then thinking about, and yes, of course I was going to squeeze this in at some point, but when I Everested, it took us 26 hours, 26. So that's insane. 19 hours longer than what you did. Now, granted, it we didn't do an exact Everesting thing or anything else, but absolutely insane and a super impressive result, man, to be able to do that.
Thank you.
I'm curious to see how long that lasts, if it lasts, who takes it on. I'm sure that you look at it and you think of like, oh yeah, I could probably knock some time out of it in X, Y, and Z too. But that's just seriously impressive.
I learned a few things. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
I would be curious for you, a question for TrainerRoad.
Mm-hmm.
How if I were to do the exact same segment at sea level, or like from roughly sea level, like how much faster would I be able to do it, you think? Like just with power wise, like you think I could hold 300 watts, you think I could hold 290, and how would that equate in minutes to a faster time? I guess like I've thought about that. I just was curious. Like obviously you can't replicate the same segment down at sea level, and there's a lot of variables, but I'd be curious,
I would think that you'd be somewhere around like 7 to 10% more capable of outputting or like putting out a higher, because basically your threshold will raise roughly from 6,000 feet up and up like that. You're probably going to be somewhere around 6 to 10%, I would assume.
That was my guess too. And just how that equates to minutes over the whole time would be kind of interesting to see. But
yeah, and air density probably doesn't matter all that much because you're not climbing that fast in terms of like, breaking through aerodynamic drag. Yeah, it'd be interesting. We'll dig into it, and people should join that conversation. We can opine and guess and do all those sort of things in the forum. If you just search for the TrainerRoad forum or go to trainerroad.com/forum and look up this episode, which basically it will be, you can find it under Keegan Swenson Everesting. You'll be able to find it there. We'll dig into some things and nerd out and figure out a bunch of stuff. I've even built up like a Google spreadsheet that's super basic that just allows you to basically put in the distance and what you've gained to see how many laps it's going to take, to see how many climbing miles you'll have, how many descending miles you have, and then to hit any sort of time goal, you can basically adjust that to see how fast you'd have to go through the whole thing. So we'll put that spreadsheet in there, plenty of other things. And if you want to, you can actually add Keegan in there. I think it's just the same thing, Keagles99. You can add him in there, and then I'm sure he'll see those notifications too, be able to jump in.
Definitely happy to help answer some questions.
If you're watching this on YouTube, give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. That would be hugely helpful, because then other people that maybe want to do Everesting attempts like this, they could find this information. It might be helpful to them. And then also drop us a comment down below to tell us either number one, how impressed you are at that time, but then number two, also what you would do if you were Everesting to try to get like a faster time. And if you see any low-hanging fruit that maybe Keegan could improve on, let us know. And it'll make for some fun discussion. So thanks, everybody, and we will talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you.